Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. President Trump says he won't pull back tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table. This as the Treasury Secretary and Trade Representative are slated for talks with their Chinese counterparts this weekend.
Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No.
President Trump said Wednesday that he would not lower tariffs in order to get Beijing to the negotiating table. Take a listen.
Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No. They said we initiated. Well, I think they ought to go back and study their files.
His remarks come as the United States and China prepare to hold high-level trade discussions. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jameson Greer will meet with their Chinese counterparts in Switzerland over the weekend. President Trump was asked Wednesday about his expectations for the upcoming meeting. He hinted at a need for the U.S. to reduce its massive trade deficit with China, saying that given high U.S. tariff rates, the U.S. is no longer losing trillions of dollars to China when it comes to trade. A step forward in the U.S.-China tariff stalemate. The United States and China are now scheduled to hold high-level trade talks. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jameson Greer will meet with their Chinese counterparts in Switzerland over the weekend. Here's more.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chief Trade Negotiator Jameson Greer will meet Beijing Economic Tsar He Lifeng. The meeting will come after months of escalating tensions that have seen both sides impose tariffs way in excess of 100%. Now the two countries are expected to discuss reductions in the broader levies, as well as possible exemptions for specific products. Speaking on Fox News, Bessent said he thought the talks would focus on de-escalation.
This isn't sustainable, as I said before, especially on the Chinese side. And, 145%, 125% is the equivalent of an embargo. We don't want to decouple. What we want is fair trade.
Appearing earlier Tuesday in Congress, he said no negotiations were yet underway with Beijing, but raised hopes of deals with other countries.
I would think that perhaps as early as this week, we will be announcing trade deals with some of our largest trading partners. They have come to us with very good offers.
Chinese officials confirmed the country would re-engage in talks, while also warning there could be no deal if there was any attempt at coercion. Analysts at Japanese bank Nomura have predicted the tariff wars could cost China some 16 million jobs.
China's central bank said it would cut benchmark interest rates, a move that could help prop up the economy before officials kickstart tariff talks with the U.S. Bad news for China's sixth largest banks. First quarter reports are showing a significant drop in both earnings and profits.
Experts said the profit drop in China's banking industry indicates a stalling economy that is likely to continue to worsen. The six Chinese major banks are all state-owned. Their first quarter data show a total net profit drop of $1 billion compared with the same period in 2024, a decrease of about 2%. They also reported a total revenue of $125 billion in the first quarter, a year-over-year decrease of $1.9 billion. Taiwanese economist Edward Huang said the tariff war will have a greater impact on Chinese banks' profits in the second quarter. He said that bank profits and stocks indicate whether a country's economy is good or bad because banks transfer funds to all sectors in a country.
And what should we make of the upcoming U.S.-China trade talks in Switzerland? Who has the cards in this relationship? We sat down with Jacqueline Deal, President and CEO of defense research firm Long-Term Strategy Group and advisory board member of State Armor, for insights. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Tiffany. It's great to be here.
Now, to begin, China seems to have changed their tune. Now they're saying they do want to meet with the U.S. to talk trade. So this Saturday, Beijing's top trade advisor, He Lifeng, will meet with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in Geneva. Now, Beijing is warning the U.S. not to ratchet up pressure at this meeting, while Trump has said he will lower the tariffs, but not to 0% on China. How should we read China now agreeing to come to the table? Is it an indicator that the tariffs have been hitting their economy harder than they're let on, or how should we read this?
Well, thanks for the question. I mean, for sure, we hear anecdotally a lot of evidence of stress in the Chinese economy, mostly down to irrational or dysfunctional policies from our perspective that the CCP has been imposing for years now. So actually kind of separate and apart from the tariffs. I think the broader agenda to keep an eye on here and not to get distracted from the day-to-day, I think the idea would be to focus on the fact that the president, the Treasury Secretary, other key leaders from the administration have made it clear that under this administration, we will not carry on business as usual because the terms of business as usual with Beijing are unacceptable. They have distorted and coerced and acquired asymmetric leverage at the expense of everyday Americans and abused their privileges within the world trading system, within the World Trade Organization, and that has to end. So it is ending.
To your point, we're seeing, Beijing do everything from stimulus measures, not reporting data coming out of the country, and we are hearing on the ground protests as people aren't getting paid. In terms of this upcoming meeting, who would you say has the upper hand here, or as Trump likes to say, who has the cards?
I think what's amazing about being on the other side of the negotiating table from the president is you don't know quite what to expect. But you should expect prudently that he understands your weaknesses. And so I would be very cautious about saying that Beijing has the upper hand in these negotiations. I think they've been at pains to depict us as the ones who have been asking for talks. And I think that's really a function of their propaganda apparatus. So we should be very wary of succumbing to that line. I think if you look at the kind of macro picture, China is much more dependent on trade than the United States is still. And so, in the broadest sense, we have the cards or we have the leverage.
To your point, a lot of China's economy is export-based, so that does play into that. Zooming out a bit here, how do you see the global tariffs playing out in places like Latin America, where many of the countries do business with both the U.S. and China?
Well, I think, again, part of the kind of perversion or abuse of the terms of trade in the international system that China has been guilty of, or the CCP regime has been guilty of over many years now, has been to try to kind of evade the spirit, if not the letter, of tariffs or other kinds of agreements that have been designed to kind of level the playing field or not allow them to subsidize and brute force their way into owning certain markets. And one of the key stratagems has been to go to third-party countries in Southeast Asia, in South America, Latin America broadly, and try to skirt prohibitions by doing business there. But I think these countries are wise and they understand that it would be a mistake to throw in their lot with Beijing.
All right, well, Jackie Deal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
A heavy blow for China's export market. Countries in Asia are tightening their export rules to stop so-called origin washing of Chinese goods from reaching the U.S. The term refers to a tactic where Chinese goods are sent to other countries in Asia, labeled as having been made in those countries instead of made in China, and then forwarded to the U.S.
The move follows U.S. accusations that Vietnam is relabeling Chinese products as made in Vietnam, before exporting them to the U.S. This lets China dodge U.S. tariffs as high as 245% on certain goods, and up to 145% on all goods. In April, Vietnam began tightening controls on imports from China. It's part of Vietnam's efforts to smooth out relations with the U.S. The country is looking to avoid Trump's reciprocal tariff rate for Vietnamese imports to the U.S., 46%. Vietnam's economy is heavily reliant on exports, so the potential tariffs could significantly slow its growth. But there's more to the story. Vietnam's exports to the U.S. and imports from China play into a tactic Beijing uses to skirt U.S. tariffs. It's called origin washing, and describes the method of goods made in China being sent to other countries, like Vietnam, labeled as having been made in the country, and then sent to the U.S. Notably, both Vietnam's imports from China and its exports to the U.S. last month reached their highest levels since the COVID-19 pandemic. Customs data shows that Vietnam imported more than $15 billion worth of goods from China in April, hinting at the potential scale of origin washing. Other Asian countries are also stepping up efforts to counter Beijing's deceptive trade practices. Thailand's Foreign Trade Department said last month that it would also take up measures to tighten origin checks for exports headed to the U.S. Meanwhile, Malaysia says it's committed to fair trade and will investigate China's origin washing exports in collaboration with the U.S. authorities.
President Trump holding a swearing-in ceremony for his new envoy to China. The appointment comes as Washington and Beijing are set to begin formal talks amid trade tensions. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has the details.
I'm glad to be your man in China. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Amid trade tensions, President Trump on Wednesday sworn in his new ambassador to China, former U.S. Senator from Georgia, David Perdue.
David will work to promote American interests and stability in the Indo-Pacific, seek fairness and reciprocity for the American worker.
Perdue, who served on the Foreign Relations Committee, has been an outspoken critic of the Chinese Communist Party. During his confirmation hearing last month, he said American buyers should stand up to China's unfair trade practices, which could deal a heavy blow to Beijing.
It's a different war, and they described it to us in the book called Unrestricted Warfare. The way forward is for the United States to become informed about that and to stand up to the challenge. That means that sometimes we'll have to sacrifice, Senator, because what we've been seduced by are the cheap prices that we gave into over the last 30 years coming out of China.
If we stop buying their product, what will happen?
Well,
if the American public says enough's enough, what will happen to their economy?
It'll collapse.
And plunging trade with the U.S. as a result of high tariffs has already led to massive factory shutdowns and job cuts in China. But it's tricky to get a sense of the real economic situation inside China, as Beijing in recent years has stopped publishing data on hundreds of economic indicators. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Senator Mark Kelly recently warned that Washington's top adversary, Communist China, still has access to 9 American telecom networks. These 9 companies include AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Comcast, among others. Last year, federal agencies found that these 9 telecom systems were compromised by Chinese state-backed hackers. Countless customer call records and private conversations were breached, including those of then-President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. Senator Mark Kelly serves on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. He said these companies are still compromised. During last week's Sedona Forum, he disclosed that the Chinese hacking operation was done through access to routers and using a lot of sophisticated techniques. And there's no quick, effective way to solve the issue, besides rebuilding the entire telecom infrastructure. The senator said he and his colleagues are actually discussing that possibility. A U.S. senior cybersecurity official said in December that it's impossible to know when the government will be able to evict all Chinese malware from U.S. systems. Coming up, Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping arrives in Moscow for talks with Russian President Putin. That says war between Russia and Ukraine rages on. The U.S. House passes multiple bills in support of Taiwan. How serious is the Chinese Communist Party's aggression towards the democratic island?
China has its sights set on the full-scale invasion of Taiwan.
And national security concerns from America's backyard. Is China surveilling sensitive U.S. information through Cuba? A House subcommittee assesses the threat. Hear the details right after the break here on China in Focus. Chinese leader Xi Jinping arrived in Moscow on Wednesday for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Worth noting, Ukrainian drone attacks were launched on Moscow hours before she arrived. Russian authorities temporarily suspended airport activities as a result. Xi and Putin are expected to discuss trade, energy cooperation, and issues regarding Chinese and Russian security. Ukrainian President Zelensky previously reached out to Xi, hoping to get China's help in ending the war with Russia. While Xi has publicly called for peace talks, China continues buying Russian oil. Beijing's deepening relationship with Russia has raised concerns among Western governments. The House just passed multiple bills to support Taiwan as the island faces off with increasing aggression from the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the latest.
China has its sights set on the full-scale invasion of Taiwan.
The House passed a new bill on Monday, which aims to curb the Chinese Communist Party's aggression against Taiwan. The bill, dubbed the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act, was sponsored by Missouri Congresswoman Ann Wagner. It would require the State Department to remove, quote, self-imposed limitations on U.S.-Taiwan engagement. The bill passed unanimously by a voice vote.
Just last month, the PRC conducted large-scale drills in the waters and airspace around Taiwan in a dangerous and destabilizing show of force.
By removing self-imposing limitations on how we engage with Taiwan, we send a clear message to Beijing. The United States stands with free nations.
There's another bill that passed the House simultaneously called the Taiwan International Solidarity Act. Now, this one aims to curb Beijing's attempts to exclude Taiwan from participating in international organizations. China has been working to have other countries either recognize the CCP or Taiwan as a means of relationship. Several countries have thus not recognized Taiwan as a self-governing democracy in order to do business with China. Now, China's military has been increasingly aggressive to Taiwan and other countries in the region, whether it's conducting military exercises near Taiwan, ramming Philippine Coast Guard vessels, or allegedly cutting Taiwan's undersea power cables. U.S. officials say a Chinese invasion of Taiwan has never been closer.
In 2024, the People's Liberation Army demonstrated growing capabilities through persistent pressure operations, with military pressure against Taiwan increasing by 300%. China's increasingly aggressive actions near Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals.
For decades, U.S.-Taiwan relations have been strategically vague.
Our nation employed a strategy of opacity, restricting our formal engagement with Taiwan to avoid upsetting or insulting the Chinese Communist Party.
The U.S. doesn't officially recognize Taiwan as separate from China, even though the island's been a self-governing democracy for 7 decades. But judging by actions rather than words, the U.S. has an unofficial relationship with Taiwan, and it's been providing military support to them for years. On top of that, after President Trump took office in his second term, the State Department removed a line from its website that said that the U.S. does not support Taiwan's independence. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
National security concerns from America's backyard. Is China surveilling sensitive U.S. information through Cuba? A House subcommittee is assessing the threat of China's growing presence in the Caribbean and its partnership with the Cuban communist regime. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
Mounting evidence suggests that the Chinese Communist Party is expanding its strategic partnership with the totalitarian communist regime in Cuba to build advanced surveillance infrastructure capable of targeting the United States.
Chair Carlo Jimenez from the Transportation and Maritime Security Subcommittee says it's, quote, one of the most brazen intelligence operations ever attempted near the American mainland.
This is no longer a distant challenge. It's an immediate concern for the security of the American people.
And Ranking Member Monica McIver says that in order to respond to the Chinese Communist Party's aggression, it's important that the U.S. maintain strong partnerships with its Latin American allies.
In 2021, Cuba signed onto China's Belt and Road Initiative, and now China is further developing sites in Cuba to collect intelligence on the United States.
Jimenez says that recent analysis and satellite imagery suggests that there are several Chinese-funded intelligence facilities across Cuba.
The possibility that these sites are capable of monitoring U.S. military operations, commercial shipping, space launches, and sensitive communications is deeply troubling.
Expert witnesses were invited to help measure the potential scale of the threat and what measures the federal government should take to stay ahead of it.
China's accelerating espionage partnership with Cuba poses a major threat for U.S. and hemispheric security. bringing together Beijing's resources and technology with Havana's troubling capacity to penetrate U.S. agencies and security institutions.
We cannot win a global competition with China if we lose sight of our own hemisphere.
Mr. Chairman, I think we need to enlist neighbors and allies. These facilities do not just snoop on the United States. CDAAs collect information omnidirectionally, meaning that other countries in the Caribbean, including those that Secretary of State Marco Rubio met on his recent successful trip to the Caribbean, are also implicated.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
A setback for the Chinese Communist Party. A South Korean court ruled to allow Shenyang Performing Arts to continue a planned two-day performance after the theater came under pressure from Beijing. It's a win for the show's presenters, who have been a target of repression from the Chinese regime for years. In April, Gangwon National University in South Korea initially approved the company's two shows on May 7th at its art center, but later canceled after pressure from the Chinese embassy. The university cited concerns over possible protests by Chinese students. On April 30th, a district court ruled the cancellation was an abuse of discretion and called the decision illegal. The art center later apologized, saying it wasn't acting of its own volition. Shenyang is known for showcasing China before communism, bringing to life ancient legends, dynastic traditions, and traditional Chinese values through dance and music. The performance also includes modern-day pieces that shed light on the ongoing persecution of Falun Gong. It's a spiritual practice rooted in meditation and moral teachings that has been brutally suppressed by the Chinese Communist Party for over 2 decades. The Chinese Communist Party has been targeting the show for more than a decade, including pressuring theaters to cancel performances, threatening lawmakers in various countries not to attend, and slashing the tires of buses used by Shenyang artists. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For On the Clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.